Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, the information I am going to provide you is not available anywhere else in any books or textbooks, and it is also very important for all of you budding economists to know. Alright, so we start with basically what I'm going to tell you is that the traditional approach to macroeconomics, which you have all learned, is not correct, and you need to develop a new approach. So the first question to consider is economics a part of humanities, which is the study of human beings, societies, individuals, or is it a science? So, if it is a historical subject, then lots of things matter. That is, you have to look at the context, historical context of the theories. It was designed in European societies. When you have a theory, what problem is that theory trying to solve? And then you have to look at history. When people use that theory, what happened as a result? All of these are any historical questions. They have to be studied within history. But if it is a science, which is what you are taught in your textbooks, then all of these things doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who invented the theory, because if it is true, it's true. It doesn't matter the person. And also, the theory is universal invariant. It doesn't matter about history. The same theory will apply in Pakistan, and in India, in Brazil, in China, in England, in 19th century, in 20th century, 21st century. The law of the gravity is same. So you don't need to study history. So there is a difference between these two approaches. So first, let me ask you, what is your vote? All people who think this is a science, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. Okay, there are a few, and what about people who think this is humanities? You need to study. Oh, more people. All right. Now let's see, what does Harvard University have to say? Because what Harvard says is what everybody else also says. So according to Harvard, according to the standard definition accepted by everybody on this planet in the universities, this is a social science, which means that we want to apply the scientific method to study human beings and society. And this means that history is irrelevant. You do not study history in your economics textbook. The Great Depression was the biggest economic event of the 20th century. And the global financial crisis of 2007 was the biggest economic event of this 21st century. But none of the textbooks that you have will explain what it was and why it was, because it's history. See, history is not science. If you have a particular event like World War II, which was very important, it was just one event. It's not a law. It's not something which can be studied as a. So basically, the scientific approach is to look for patterns which are universal, invariant. They happen all the time. So in that case also, science requires that you have to have quantitative methods, you have to have data, you have to measure everything. If something cannot be measured, then it doesn't exist. So if we say that people should be trustworthy and they should have iman and they should be honest, well, that's not something that's measurable. So it's not taken into account in economics theories. And then, if it's a part of science, then we have to have equations. We can find a formula which will tell you how the society will evolve. We can find a formula which will tell how much you will buy of some good. We have to have calculus and differentiation, and then we can solve these things. But the reality is that human beings don't follow formulas. So actually the truth is that in late 19th century in Europe, there was a battle of methodologies. On the one side, there were the people who argued, like I am doing, that economics is a historical subject. It is qualitative. You cannot have a mathematical formula. You have to look at the historical context. On the other side, there were the scientists. They said, look, you can't learn anything from history. If I study something which is very particular, very unique, then how can I learn anything from it? If it is an event that took place in history, it happened once, the situation was unique. Now, what it implies for now, there is nothing. Unless we can find something which is true of that time, which is true at all times, unless we can find a law, it is useless to study history. So this argument has a great deal of logic to it, but it is wrong. But the reason it's wrong is very difficult to understand. And in fact, the scientific side won. And it was agreed that we should treat economics as a science. So we should look for universal laws. So, this quote, actually it's from some politician, not Keynes, that we are talking about economic laws, but actually people are hungry and starving. And it's not true that there are economic laws which are like the law of gravity. Any economic laws that exist because we, human beings, make these laws, and we can change those laws. So these are not like the laws of physics, which are irrelevant. So, what is true is that since the 1890s, when the scientific methodology became dominant, there has been a steady decline in understanding in economics. What has happened is not the progress of knowledge, but the decline of knowledge. The idea that there are economic laws, the law of supply and demand, law of consumer behavior, these are wrong. There are no laws of consumer behavior. Consumer behavior is determined by our social norms, society. If we say that we should live a simple life, we should not consume in excess of our needs, we should avoid israf and tabzir, we will have a different type of law of consumers. And if we say that no, the object of life is to maximize consumption, we will have a different type of society. And there is no mathematical formula which shows what every man must do regardless of what he believes. So basically the problem is that science won out in this battle, but the truth lost, and there has been loss of understanding in economics. So currently the economic theories we study are just false. They are wrong theories. The reason is that, the greatest evidence for this is the global financial crisis of 2007, which took, as you may or may not know, there are 7 different schools of macroeconomic thought, sometimes more or less, but not one of them predicted the global financial crisis, and even after the fact, it is very hard for them to understand what happened, because according to economic theory, standard classical economic theory, this could not happen. The global financial crisis could not happen. In fact, economists said, people came, practical people, men of the world came to the economists, said something very wrong is happening in the stock market, and we are afraid that there might be collapse, that there is a bubble economy. But Eugene Farmer said, no, there is no such thing as a bubble, it's impossible. People are rational. And other very famous economists said that, no, what you are saying is wrong. The financial markets cannot collapse, they are doing fine, and we are doing very well, and so on. So, actually we could say that economic theory was responsible for this crisis, because Not only did it not predict, but it confidently argued that such a thing could not happen. In fact, after the crisis, the Congress of the United States made a commission to investigate how economic theory caused this crisis. This is a very unusual thing. I mean, the fact that economic theory led to this crisis was investigated by the Congress, and Robert Solow testified, and he said that yes, the standard macro theory that we are currently using, the DSGE model, dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model, is actually responsible for this, because the DSGE model cannot take into account the problems that led to this crisis. It basically makes it impossible. If you use the DSGE model, you cannot possibly understand why the crisis occurred, and this model is the currently dominant model used to study macroeconomics. So we come to the goals of macroeconomic policy, and basically what is macroeconomics about? It is about achieving full employment. It's about achieving stable prices, so no inflation, and it's about achieving rapid growth. There now exist controversies about how to achieve these goals. I mean, basically schools of thought have different ideas about what is the policy required to achieve those goals. And in addition, now the last goal was everybody agrees on full employment, that is a useful goal, but what it means and how it can be achieved, these two things are objects of controversy among different theories. As far as stable prices, again everybody agrees that inflation is not a good thing, and so we should try to achieve zero inflation or a small amount of inflation. But again, how it can be achieved, there is a lot of controversy about that. Rapid growth as a goal is now subject to controversy, because although it has been widely believed, and it still continues to be widely believed, that we need to have rapid growth in GNP per capita to eliminate poverty, there is a lot of evidence that this is not true. And basically, the idea of the rapid growth is that if we increase income, then that will help the poor. But the fact is that over the past 30 years, an enormous amount of growth has taken place, but all of the gains have gone to the top 1%. So, if we have even more growth, as long as the gains keep going to the top 1%, the bottom 99% don't benefit from it. So, what is the point of growth? So, the issue really is redistribution. How can we get the wealth from the top 1% and give it to the poor? This problem is not at all looked at by economists. The main problem of economics is redistribution. How we can get wealth from the top to the bottom. This is systematically ruled out. The economists all believe in the trickle-down theory. As long as the wealth accumulates, it will automatically benefit the poor. But this is not true empirically. Over the last 30 years, the labor class in the USA has remained more or less constant, in fact has gone down. Whereas the share of the labor class has actually improved, the conditions of the bottom 25% of the planet, living conditions have become worse, and the top 25% have increased tremendously. The top 1%, the top 0.01%, they have made all the gains. In the last year, the gains to the top very small 0.01% have been much larger, like on the order of 300%, whereas the bottom class has gotten actually a 10% loss. Last year, about 50 billionaires were created in the USA, because basically the wealth is concentrating at the top. So the issue is that why should we worry about growth when all the fruits of the growth go only to the already rich and wealthy? The point is that we need to worry about how growth, the benefits of growth can go to everybody. Okay, so that was the basic framework. But now what I want to say is that the macroeconomics, basically the theory was created by the Great Depression. The Great Depression was not forecast by economists at that time. Nobody could understand it. The leading economists of the time said that this is not a serious thing, and even during the recession they said it will recover very quickly. But it didn't happen because the theories were completely wrong. According to the theories which you already study, the labor market will automatically find an equilibrium. So there can be no unemployment, because if there is excess unemployment, what will happen? The wages will decline, and so the supply will go down, demand will go up, and unemployment will be eliminated. That's what the theory says. It didn't happen. For more than 15 years, there was large unemployment in the order of 20%. Millions of people suffered very heavily. There was starvation, hunger, social disruption of all kinds, and the economists kept waiting for the market mechanism to work, and it didn't. So basically what the Keynesian theory does, and it's not written very clearly in your textbooks, is that Keynes repealed the law of supply and demand in the labor market. He said supply and demand doesn't work in the labor market. Well, if it doesn't work in the labor market, then how can we know if it works in other markets? So the issue is that this theory, but it's also hidden up. It's not written very clearly in your textbooks that this is what Keynesian theory says. So since labor supply and demand doesn't work in the labor market, then what can be done? The government has to come in and to reduce the unemployment. Now, one thing that I want to emphasize is Keynesian macroeconomics is the beginning. The word macroeconomics and the theory was invented by Keynes, and it has gone, and that's the history that I'm going to describe today. But it was invented, you see, this is the point, it was invented to solve a particular historical problem that occurred in USA and Europe. To think that we can take this theory and apply it in Pakistan is just foolish. It's because, Pakistan is completely different. To make a simpler example, you see, Karl Marx invented this theory of Marxism by studying problems of England. In England, the problem was that they were capitalists, they had large factories, a huge number of people were laborers, and they were working under very bad conditions. So basically the Marxist analysis was that there are capitalists and they exploit the laborers, and so what can we do about this? Now, some Marxists come to Pakistan and they say, okay, so let us study the class struggle in Pakistan and let's look at the capitalists and the laborers. This is not the problem of Pakistan. The idea is valid. You can think about classes and class struggle. This is fine. But you have to identify the classes in Pakistan, which are rural landlords, peasants. The capitalists are a very small proportion, and the labor industrialization hasn't taken place in any heavy way. So the people who are working in factories are just very small in number and not really relevant to the big picture. So basically this is the problem, that we import these theories and we apply them without applying our brains, and these don't give good results. The same is true of Keynesian macroeconomics or of monetarism or of real business cycle theory. All of these are theories invented to solve and in the light of problems which occur in advanced industrial economies. Our problems are entirely different. So we have to use our own brains to study our own problems and to devise our own economic theories. Unfortunately, defeat in wars and colonialism has created a enslaved mindset where people say that, those people the white people are very smart, so instead of solving our own problems, we just give it to them and they will analyze our problems and they'll find our solutions for us, and we just copy and imitate. This is ridiculous, and this is what is happening. So we need our own Keynes and we need our own analysts in order to understand our own economy on our own terms. And for the first thing for that is to have the confidence to understand that we are able to do these things. And there are several steps that we need to take in order to acquire that confidence. So first, I'm going to analyze macroeconomic theory within the context of European history, because that's what it was developed to solve. I can't understand and I can't analyze, I can't use macroeconomics to study Pakistan because it was not developed to study problems of Pakistan, even though people try to do that. So, but you will see, and that's my hope, that you will see how if we try to understand macroeconomics in the context of European history, then we can understand it very clearly what was happening, and then we can also understand why the same theory would not apply here. And also things which appear mysterious when they are stated as universal laws become clear when you study them in historical context, that this is what he was trying to do in the context of history. So that's the goal of this lecture, to explain macroeconomic theories within the context of US and European history, and to show that the same theories won't work here, and so to encourage you to think on your own and to develop your own frameworks for our own economy. Alright, so why is there a puzzle? Well, basically the Great Depression is a mystery that in the 1920s was called the Roaring Twenties. Everything was booming. There was high employment, high production, stock prices were increasing, everything was going very well, and people were saying, we have reached a new level of civilization and there is no return, and now we have entered an era of permanent prosperity, everything will be wonderful for all time. And suddenly the stock market collapsed, banks collapsed, and factories closed, unemployment increased, life savings of many people, millions of people was wiped out. People were hungry and begging in the streets, and there were some areas which became dust bowl. There are subsistence farmers. What they do is they take loans and then they plant crops and then they make their living. If money is not available, then farming cannot take place, and those areas, if they are not farmed, then the land returns to desert, and that happened in the Arizona Dust Bowl and some other places. So there was a huge amount of misery caused by this. But the point is that why did this happen? Because the people are still there, the factories are still there, everything is there. There was not that there was a war and factories were destroyed or somehow the productive capacity was lost. Everything is there, and suddenly the economy, which used to be working just fantastically 1 month ago, is now working terribly, and nothing has changed, nothing physical has changed. So how did this happen? Why did it happen? How can it be prevented? These are the issues that were the source of the puzzle. According to economic theory, economy is a self-regulating mechanism. It automatically fixes problems. If there is a disequilibrium, it will automatically move towards equilibrium, and so on. And this didn't happen. So that was the puzzle which Keynes solved in some way. Actually, the Keynesian theory is not actually 100% correct. There are some errors and flaws in it, but it did have an important role. Okay, so the Keynesian macroeconomics was invented to solve the puzzle of the Great Depression. According to classical economics, unemployment cannot happen. So now I ask you the question, is it true? Do we have equilibrium in the labor market? if there is massive unemployment, is it true that the wages will fall? And when the wages fall, then the people who want to work, they say, oh, this wage is too low, so I don't want to work, so they are no longer unemployed. And so the supply of labor goes down, demand for labor goes up because now labor is cheap, everybody wants to hire, and then unemployment is eliminated. This is what your theory says, which all of you have studied. Well, when I was at Islamic University, there were 4 positions for Naib Qasid or something like that. And there were 1,000 applicants and many phone calls to place. So what should have happened? Well, we should have said, okay, I'm hiring, the pay scale is 10,000 rupees, I'm going to reduce it to 5,000 because obviously among the 1,000 people there will be some people who will be ready to work. Did that happen? I didn't see it happening. In fact, what would happen according to theory is that some of the people would say that, look, you're trying to hire people at 10,000, but I'm willing to work for 5,000 only. That also didn't happen. So, there was this excess demand, but there was no movement in the wages. And this is not one incident in Islamic University. It happens all over the place, all over Pakistan, all over the world. It doesn't happen that wages fall to reduce unemployment. And therefore, unemployment persists. According to classical theory, unemployment cannot exist except in a temporary for a short amount of time, while wages takes a little bit of time to adjust. But we find in reality, in many economies, long and persistent unemployment. Wage doesn't change, doesn't fall. So the question is, why doesn't wage fall? Well, Keynes argued that prices were sticky. That was one of his assumptions. In fact, that also doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if you look at what happened in the Great Depression, the wages did fluctuate quite a lot and they did go down, so it was not that they were fixed in nominal terms. But there is something that the real wage did not actually fall very much. But the main thing that I want to point here is that conventional economic theory that you have studied is incapable of dealing with the most important economic problem, which is unemployment. According to the economic theory you have studied, unemployment doesn't exist. In fact, one of the schools of macroeconomic thought, real business cycle theory, says exactly this, that labor markets are in equilibrium, which means that if somebody is unemployed, he is unemployed by choice. He does not want to work at the market wage, and so that's why, because the wage is too low, he's not actually in the supply, doesn't want to. So basically he says, and other people have criticized, have mocked this RBC view by saying that, according to the RBC theorists, the Great Depression was actually the Great Vacation. People didn't want to work at low wages, so they took a vacation from the job. So that's really not the case. But what I want to say is the most important problem for any nation is unemployment, in the sense that if everybody is employed, then not only is the productive capacity of the nation high, but also everybody has a job, so they can support their families and live in some sort of a decent way. And so this is the most important problem, economic problem. All other problems are secondary. But economic theory doesn't give you any tools to deal with this problem at all. So that's why we need to think about our own economic problems and our own theory separately. Alright, so now I would like to go back to the US economy. In the 1929, one of the major problems was that there was a basically what happened was that the banks gambled with the money that they had in the form of deposits, because there was a huge amount of money to be made in the stock markets. So they put their money in stocks, the stocks crashed, they lost all the money, so then they didn't have money to pay back the depositors, and so the banks declared bankruptcy and went home laughing. because they didn't actually lose from this, but the depositors were left with all of their money wiped out. So, post Great Depression, a lot of laws were made to prevent this from happening. One of them was the Glass-Steagall Act, which prevented banks from investing in stock markets and gambling with the money of the depositors. Also, there was a maximum interest rate. This meant that banks could not compete with each other. I will give you more interest. Because more interest means that the banks have to now work harder they have to earn more money in order to pay. So they will be more inclined to take risks, which we didn't want them to take. Then the banks were restricted. Basically, all of these laws that were passed were to prevent competition in the banking industry. So each bank was permitted to operate in only one state. There are 50 states in the USA. So you could not have a very big bank because and all of the banks were limited in their area. And finally, to top it all off, there was federal deposit insurance. If a bank did collapse and lose the money, the depositors would receive the money from the government. So as a result of this, until the 1980s, for 50 years, there were very few bank failures because these laws worked. In the 1980s, these laws were repealed, and then bank failures again started to happen. In fact, this is the last 30 years is very different from the previous 50 years, and this is very important to understand. To understand what macroeconomics is today, you have to study USA history, because macroeconomics today is direct result of things that happened in USA and in Europe. And if you don't make the link, if you study the theory as formulas and differential equations, you can't understand it because it doesn't make any sense. If you consider, for example, that some event in Pakistan, let's say today's events, dharnas happening. So now we make a theory of dharnas, and now we say, okay, when such and such happens, then dharna will take place, and this will cause this effect and that effect. And we now study. Now if somebody in England is studying this theory, he will just scratch his head, wonder what is happening here, what is dharna and why is this and that, because it makes no sense in the British context. Just like that, we are studying these theories which were devised for very special, very concrete, very specific problems that arise in US, and now we are studying this problem and out of context, and we are wondering why, what does it mean? And it doesn't make any sense because it never happened here. These things for which the theory was made never happened here. Now, the idea that this theory is a science is the problem, that because it's a science, so it's a universal invariant. So the theory which is valid for USA must also be valid for Pakistan and Bangladesh and Vietnam, when it is not. Macroeconomics, fiscal policy, monetary policy do not work here in the same way that they do in the USA. They have different effects. The same policy here will have different effects here, and it will have different effects in USA, and different effects in England, and different effects in Greece. So you have to study everything within its own historical context. So now, these wrong theories that we study have huge impact. Studying the interwar period, Mandel, who's a Nobel-winning economist, said that if the economic theories had been correct, if the economists had the right theories, then there would have been no Great Depression. And that is true. The Great Depression was not a natural. You see, if an earthquake happens, that's a natural disaster. It cannot be prevented. But if human beings make wrong decisions that leads to Great Depression, that's something that's preventable. If we had the right theory, we could have prevented it. Right now, Pakistan is suffering from huge economic losses because we are using the wrong theories and we are accepting the wrong theories and we are carrying wrong policies on the basis of wrong theories. For example, privatization is thought to be a great thing, whereas in fact, historical record shows that it has been a big failure wherever it has been applied in general. So, but the government believes otherwise. So basically what Mundell says is if the right theories had been followed, there would have been no Great Depression, no Nazi Revolution, no World War II. All of these were results of wrong economic theories being applied and lack of understanding. So the point is that it is important to have an understanding of economic theory. Now the question that the picture is showing, that how can we understand theories? Well, one very important clue is, and why are the dominant theories wrong? Well, you have to look at who benefits from this theory. If you look at that, then it becomes very easy to understand the theory. If you look at the theory, see, you have been trained to think of theories as being true or false. So then you study a theory and try to analyze, is this true or is this false? This will not lead to any understanding. What you have to do is, if this theory is applied, who will benefit and who will lose? If you study that, then you will understand what this theory is about. And this is a different way of thinking about theories. So, now we come back to the theory itself. What is the Keynesian solution? Well, basically, Keynes said that the Great Depression was caused by a shortfall in effective demand, and if the demand is insufficient for goods in the economy, then the factories will close down, there will not be sufficient supply of labor, and so on. There will be surplus labor because there is not sufficient demand for it. So, one of his solutions was to use monetary policy. If you increase the level of money in the economy, that will increase the demand, and when the demand increases, then the supply will also respond to this, and the factories will start working again, and you will get to full employment. However, Keynes said that in some situations, economies can fall into a liquidity trap, which means basically that when people get more money, instead of spending it and creating demand, they just store it because they are so deeply in the hole that they want to save money to protect their future. So instead of spending it, they just want to, this is precautionary demand of some sort. So in that situation, just pumping money into the economy will not work. So then he argued that you should do fiscal policy, which is basically the government directly engages in investment. It creates public works projects, it hires people, and basically that would lead to more demand, and once the greater demand comes into being, the government can leave off. I mean, this is what he called pump priming. When when your water pump has only air in it, you need to put in a little bit of water, and once you put in that water, then the pump starts working. So exactly like that, the fiscal policy was not supposed to be a permanent thing. It's just that once you create the right amount of aggregate demand, then the government can leave off and the private sector will take over. So, now, a very important element, if you want to study European and US history, is to understand that behind everything there is a battle of ideologies which has been going on for about 3 centuries. Very important battle, and without knowing this battle, this is at the root, this is hidden beneath the surface, and without knowing this battle, you cannot understand anything which is happening. वो बात सारे फसाने में जिसका जिक्र न था, वो बात उनको बहुत नागवार गुजरी है. So the point is that you study these things, the debate between monetarists and the Keynesians, and there are many controversies, and the main point, the battle, the Cambridge controversy on capital theory. You just can't understand what's going on. Why is one side saying this, and why is the other side saying this, and why does it matter? until you go to the root and you say, oh, the argument is about free market versus regulation. So there are two types of ideas. One idea is that the market economy works perfectly. You do not disturb anything. The government should not do anything. Let everybody do, it's called laissez-faire. Let them do whatever they want. So, the main ideas are that you should minimize government, you should have privatization, you should have liberalization, no taxes, no customs duties, no export incentives, no industrial policy. Industrial policy is you support certain crucial industries and you try to make them function better. Basically, no interference with the free markets. The government should just disappear. On the other side, you have regulation, that the government should actively intervene to help the economy. It should put up protective barriers to protect its industries. It should have an employment policy. If people are unemployed, then it should provide them with jobs. It should look after the social welfare of the people. The laborers should organize to avoid being exploited by the capitalists. Monopolies should be prevented, and so on. So basically, there's these are both types of market economies, but one of them is a regulated economy where there are controls and rules, and the other is the unregulated economy. There are no rules. Now, why did this ideological battle take place? Well, basically, this is very important to understand. This is at the root of everything and is never mentioned. In Europe, when they rejected their religion, Christianity, then they said that we have to find a way to create a political system, an economic system, a social system which doesn't depend on religion, because religion is wrong. Well, you see, one thing is that they were quite right. I mean, the Christianity religion that they had was very bad in many ways, and so they were quite correct in rejecting their religion, because the religion had already become contaminated. But then they said, okay, then we have to use our own logic to understand how man should behave and how society should be constructed. What should our economic system be? And what should our political system be? So, one side of the battle, there were many thinkers who said that, Hobbes is one of them, said that, man is basically a wild animal, and if we have no laws, if we have freedom, then society will become a jungle, a warfare, everyone against everyone. So what we need to have very heavy regulation, very heavy laws. The government has to do everything, has to regulate every bottle, there has to be justice, and all morality will be enforced by the government, because God is not there anymore to create morality, so the government has to do it. That was one. So Hobbes has a book called The Leviathan, which says that the government has to become a gigantic government, and in order to take care of all of these problems. On the other side, there were the people who were the free marketeers. They said that no, human beings are basically nice, and if we just have no laws and just let everybody do whatever they want, then things will come out correctly and properly. So we don't need regulation. So this same battle is continuing today. Now the appearance is very different from the reality. The laissez-faire theorist, freedom, you see, Milton Friedman was one of the big people who favored the free markets, and he wrote a book in which he idealized the free markets, that let everybody be free. Freedom is wonderful, freedom is great. Now, on the surface, this looks like an egalitarian philosophy, that everybody has an equal chance, nobody is, but actually in reality, this is what happens is that the people who are poor are only free to be slaves of others. They have no choices. And the rich people, they can maximally exploit this freedom. They can enslave other people. They can buy lives of people because there is no regulations. So, in fact, in ancient Iran, there was this Zarathustra, and he invented a religion in which he said, all of these laws of that there is private property, there are social relationships, these are all nonsense. Everybody is free, everything belongs to everybody. And so, on the surface, this looks like it's a sort of a complete communism. Everybody has access. On the surface, it looks like a great philosophy, and the poor man can get whatever he wants. But what really happened in Iran as a result of his philosophy was that the rich people would just go and take over whatever land they wanted, they would grab whatever women they wanted, they would take anything because they had the power. So, on the surface, the philosophy is egalitarian, everybody has everything belongs to everybody. But the reality of it was that the rich people had got tremendous advantage. Previously, the society prevented the rich man couldn't go and grab everything that the poor man had because it was against the rules, it was against the law, it was against the custom. But the religion said that no, everything belongs to everybody. But in practice, it meant that everything belongs to the rich. And this is exactly what is happening today. The religion of free markets has the appearance of equality, has logic, has rationality. Yes, everybody is free. But the reality of it is very horrible. Basically, the freedom is the freedom of the rich to exploit the poor. So, if you want to understand economics of the 20th century and the 21st century, you have to read Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. This actually studies the emergence of a number of theories in the context of history, where you can understand what is happening much more clearly than you can when you read Barrow and when you read Hirofumi Yuzawa and Manikiv. All of these books on macro won't tell you anything, but because they are just abstract scientific theories and they don't explain the theory in the context of history. Who benefits from this theory? Who loses from this theory? This is not explained, and that's really crucial to understanding. And so, some of my articles also deal with this, which are mentioned here. But I don't have time to go into that right now. So, what happened was that although the Keynes theory came into being in the middle of the two wars, between World War I and World War II, he wrote this book. But basically, it didn't get accepted until after World War II. So, according to Keynes, the low aggregate demand leads to unemployment, high aggregate demand leads to inflation. At full employment, there's a Phillips curve. Well, Phillips curve was not part of Keynesian theory, it came later, but it is consistent with the ideas of Keynes. So, basically, for about 25 years, from 1948 to 1973, Keynesian theories were used by everybody, and it had a very good result. At the same time, the Chicago school was arguing that Keynes is wrong, and the government, but they were arguing because they wanted the freedom for the rich, which was very much restricted. So the Chicago school was there, they were putting out these monetarist theory of economics, and they were putting out these theories that the government interference always causes problems, and the money supply should not be used as an instrument of policy. It causes problems. There were many of these, but when I went to graduate school in 1974, this was a small minority school which was not considered very respectable. Most of the people thought that these are quacks and kooks and they don't have correct understanding of economics. But things were changed a lot in the 70s, and in the 80s, this Chicago school came to power for reasons that I will describe only very briefly. And then the Chicago school became the dominant school, and the Keynesians were on the run. They were defeated, and they were not considered as a respectable school for maybe about 10 years at least. So this is the picture of the Keynesian world. On one hand, you have low aggregate demand. In that case, you have low production, you have excess capacity, you have unemployment. On the other side, you have high aggregate demand. In that case, you have full employment, but also you have lots of inflation, and so there are several harmful effects to the economy from this. So in the middle, you have equilibrium, and equilibrium is full employment and zero inflation in Keynes. And later on in the Phillips curve, full employment at some minimal inflation rate, small amount of inflation. So in the 25 years that the Keynesian theory was applied, there was very good results from this theory. Even though, as I said, this is not a correct theory, but it worked very well in Europe. I'm not talking anything about the Asian and African economies. They did not and they could not apply Keynesian theory because their governments and their economic systems didn't have any resemblance to the Western economic systems. So to say that you can take this theory from there and transport it here is just ridiculous. Some people asked me about this, that was Pakistan a regulated market economy or unregulated? I said, well, basically these terms don't apply to Pakistan. These were terms that were invented to describe different types of European economies, and they are useful in that context. They are not useful here. We have to create a new framework to understand what is happening in our economy. If we apply foreign tools to understand, if we think about capitalist and industrialism and labor, we will just misunderstand what's happening in Pakistan. So anyway, in Europe and USA, the Keynesian economics worked very well. There was full employment, stability, prosperity. One of the most important things which has not been mentioned by very many people, over this 25 centuries there was growth, very good growth. I think that over 25 years the production doubled. But this growth was even. All classes benefited equally from it. The bottom 20% of the income distribution also gained. They also doubled their income, and the top, they also doubled. So the gains from economic growth were equally spread through all the classes, and there was general prosperity. This did not continue. Growth did continue after 73, but the equal distribution did not continue. Now, well, this was very well, but there were some people who were unhappy with this quarter century, and these were the multinationals, the industrial complex, and the the rich and wealthy who were just not happy with having an equal share with the rest. They wanted to have their maximum amounts, power, and this is what they used to have. And in fact, in this period, they managed to achieve this in some countries like Chile and in Latin America. They managed to achieve very high profits, and they became, they became very interested and eager about achieving the same gains within England and USA and Europe, which they could if the regulations were not there. But unlike other countries like Chile, etc., where they used dictatorships to achieve their goals, they used dictatorships to force deregulation on economies because it could not be achieved democratically, because it's not in the best interest of the people. But in the USA, UK, Europe, they could not achieve the same results by dictatorship. So there were two elements that were necessary to create the monetarist revolution or counter-revolution against Keynes. One was that they were looking for a crisis. If there is a crisis, then people are in shock. This is what basically Naomi Klein discusses, the shock doctrine. That if you have a shock, then you have a time to change things, because then people are confused, and in that time, if you are prepared and ready, you can say, okay, that's the problem, here's the solution, and this is what we do, and everybody is confused, so they will accept because they don't understand what's going on. And meanwhile, you have been preparing for this. And this is exactly what happened. This is what Milton Friedman said, that this is a very important statement. Only a crisis produces change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. So for about 25 years, the Chicago school just prepared the ideas. They knew that nobody will believe them, nobody will buy it, and they were waiting for a crisis. Once the crisis comes, then they said, then we will go in with full force and we will have the ideas and nobody else will know, and we will be able to do our will, and that's exactly what happened. So, these are very smart people. And they are controlling the world right now, so we have to be smarter. So, Milton Friedman started preparing his ideas. Nobody believed it. I read these ideas while I was in graduate school, but the teacher told us, this is just nonsense. Monetarists say this and this is not. But, so, Friedman wrote the monetary history, in which he prepared, you see, there's the Keynesian explanation of the Great Depression. Friedman provided an alternative explanation. You see, the Keynesian explanation, which is everybody believes, is that the free markets failed. Now, and that's why there was huge unemployment. If we believe this, then we will not allow free markets. So you have to first have an alternative explanation. You have to say that no, it was not the failure of free markets. So what was the explanation? Well, Friedman wrote a book on the monetary history in which he said that basically the money supply became very low and the government failed to keep it at the right level. If the government had maintained the money supply at a constant level, the Great Depression would not have happened. Now there is a little bit of a contradiction here, because on the one hand, Friedman is saying that government shouldn't do anything. On the other hand, he's saying that the government should intervene to prevent the Great Depression. But basically the point is that he is saving the free market from the blame. And fiscal policy, why fiscal policy is wrong? Well, there is the crowding out theory, that if the government invests a certain amount, the private sector will not invest exactly the same amount, so total investment will not change, so fiscal policy doesn't work either. And there were many of these theories that were invented to show that the government cannot really bring any benefit to the public. But these theories were not accepted at all until the 1970s. The mainstream believed that Friedman is a kook, not a respectable economist. He's just pushing these theories which are wrong. But things changed. Solow made a joke about Friedman when he was teaching, but the joke cannot be repeated. It's a little bit a racy joke. Okay, so as I said, there was a crisis. That was the crisis that the monetarists had been waiting for. This was the oil crisis. How did this oil crisis be? Well, you know that there was a Yom Kippur war in early 1970s, and the US supported Israel against the Arab countries, and as a result, the Arab countries imposed an oil embargo on the USA. This led to a recession in the US economy. Energy prices increased, inflation occurred, and also unemployment occurred. And suddenly, Friedman stepped in and said, look, this proves that Keynesianism is wrong. Why? Because according to the Keynesian theory, if you have one or the other, you have unemployment but no inflation, or you have full employment and then you have inflation. But actually, you see, this was a trick of Friedman which somehow escaped everybody. Actually, a few people did come. You see, you have heard, I'm sure, in your courses, the idea of demand pull inflation and cost push. So basically, this idea was put there to protect and to preserve the Keynesian theory. They said, the people who were Keynesians, that now what we're seeing is not a demand pull inflation, which is what Keynes talks about, that there's excess money. we are seeing a cost push inflation because the oil prices have risen due to exogenous reasons, and that price rise, because the energy is a very vital sector, it affects all the prices, so there is inflation. And because of this inflation, this increase in prices, there is temporary dislocations in the economy which is leading to unemployment. So all of this is very easily explainable within the Keynesian paradigm. It's not that it's a big problem, but it was made to be a big problem by Friedman very successfully. You see, what the first name, only a crisis, actual or perceived. So there was a crisis, but it was a small crisis. It was made out to be a big crisis. Why? Because there was a huge amount of money behind Friedman. This is also very important to understand. The industrialists, the capitalists, the wealthy people who had a lot of money, and they were restricted by Keynesian policies. In many ways, they were hurting. You see, when one of the objects of the very rich and powerful capitalists is to have a large class of unemployed people, because that gives them labor to work in their factories and cheap labor. If the laborers have a good standard of living, they will not work for free. Labor costs will be high, and that will reduce the profits of the wealthy. So they wanted to get rid of these Keynesian policies, and so when the crisis occurred, one of the things that Friedman had actually predicted, that stagflation could occur, he had come up with the explanation of the Phillips curve, which was based on expectations in advance of the actual stagflation that took place. So when it took place, it was taken as a confirmation of his theories. In fact, it was not. But at that time there was a lot of confusion. People didn't understand what was going on, and so it gave him respectability which he did not have. So in the crisis that followed the oil crisis, there was a lot of confusion, and lot of money was pumped in to create a campaign for free markets, and there was the idea that things are going very badly in America. It was projected much more than the reality. I mean, there was a small disturbance in the economy. It was made out to be a very big disturbance in order to create a perception of a crisis, and this led eventually to the coming to the power of Reagan and Thatcher. These are the famous Reaganomics and supply-side economics that you may have heard about. Well, basically Keynes is called demand side because it's all about management of the aggregate demand. So Reaganomics was about the supply side. It said that demand doesn't matter, and Keynes is completely wrong. And what we need to worry is about the supply. And basically, how do we get supply? Well, basically, the money makers are the producers, the wealthy capitalists. The more money you gave them, the more money that will be produced. So Reagan actually made tax changes in which the poor were taxed to give money to the rich. This was a very unusual policy, and he defended it, that if we give the money to the poor, they will just eat it, and that will not add to the economic productive capacity. If we give it to the rich people, they will build factories, and that will create additional capacity. This didn't happen, but anyway. But he did it. I mean, he gave the money to the wealthy, but they didn't invest in factories. They invested in stocks and other assets and created what is called artificial wealth. This is one very important illusion which is even now a problem. That people, when you measure the wealth, some of the wealth is artificial. You see, if the stock market doubles in value today, then according to the standard measures of your GDP, our wealth will double. But it's not true. This is just funny money. This is fake. This is an illusion. The real economy has not changed. But previously, as I said, in 19th century and in early 20th century, people understood this. And people said that, this kind of wealth production is harmful, and these people who speculate in stocks, these are people who harm the economy, and we should tax this kind of windfall gains, and we should do many things. These financiers fought back. They said that, no, we are producing wealth, and when in fact they were not. But their arguments became accepted, and now the conventional economics that you study believes in these arguments and teaches them to you that if the stock market doubles, if the prices of land in Islamabad go up 5 times or 10 times, then the nation has become wealthier. This is completely ridiculous. But if you just count the money value of the assets, it has definitely increased. So if you look at GDP, it will go up. This is not true. So you have to differentiate between productive increases and financial increases, which are an illusion. But we don't currently differentiate because of the counterattack of the financial theorists which succeeded. So what Reagan did was that he deregulated the savings and loans associations. He said that, the banking rules we had are bad because they are stifling the growth of the financial industry. So what we do is we take away the rules, and the savings and loan industry in the USA will be free to operate as they wish. It's the free market. So almost immediately, the things that had happened in the Great Depression repeated themselves. In about 3 years, you had a complete collapse, a big disaster. The savings and loans started gambling with their depositors' money. They lost about $80 billion, which was a very large sum of money at that time. In fact, what's his name? This Lebanese black swan guy. Anyway, what he has done, he calculated that the entire profits of the banking industry for 50 years was wiped out in this one single savings and loan crisis. So, if you just consider, has the banking system been good or has it benefited the economy? On a simple cost-benefit analysis, you can say that it has not, because although it has created profits for 50 years, in one shot all of them were lost. And again, anything that happened between 1980s and 2007, everything much more than that was lost in the global financial crisis. So, what happened as a result? Well, what happened was that the government, this time, unlike the Great Depression, this time the government did not let the banks collapse. They bailed them out. They put in the billions of dollars to save the banks and to save the depositors. As a result, there was no loss to the depositors, and there was no loss to the bankers from all this gambling. Who did the loss go to? Well, it went to the general taxpayer, who could not understand, and it was distributed over millions of people, so it was not obvious. And the loss was to the economy as a whole. The economy as a whole suffered from decline in growth and many other things, but this was not visible. So the cost of the crisis was paid by everybody, but nobody was aware of it. So, in the global economy, what happened was that in the early 90s, Russia collapsed. So the one alternative which existed to capitalism collapsed, and as a result, the Washington Consensus was born in IMF and World Bank, and they said, okay, this is the policy which will work everywhere. I was teaching economics at that time, and I was very surprised. They are saying that, okay, there are certain these policies that what you need to do is privatize, you need to liberalize, you need to deregulate, and automatically the economies will progress. Means that if you come to Pakistan and you want to improve the economy of Pakistan, you don't need to know anything about Pakistan. All you do is You sell all of the government factories, you cut down the customs duties and reform the taxes, and that's it. You don't need to know what is grown in Pakistan, what kind of industries do you have, what kind of people are there, what's the rural sector like, who are the landlords, who are the serfs, who are the bonded labor, nothing of that. You don't need anything. So it's one size fits all. This is what Stiglitz called it when he... So it doesn't make sense. I mean, just as a normal, sensible human being, one would think that if I want to make an economic policy over Pakistan, I should study Pakistan. But according to IMF, World Bank, no, it's not needed at all. They have already automatically got the magic bullet. So now the second question is, okay, obviously they are wrong, but why? Why do they want to have these 10 policies which are part of the Washington Consensus? So now if you follow the money, then you have to look, who will this benefit? So you see, you want to have, if you think of it from the point of view of multinational, it wants to come in, it wants to sell its products, so you want to have exchange rate which is flexible. They want to have cheap rupees so they can buy up the country's assets cheaply. So they say, there is another puzzle that the IMF recommends that we should always devalue. Surely this is strange. I mean, you need to look at economic conditions to decide what is the optimal currency level, whether it should go up or down. Maybe in some countries going up will be useful, in some countries changing the exchange rate. Even, from economic theory there is the Lerner condition, the elasticity. You need to study whether if you reduce the decrease rate, will the revenue increase or not. But none of this is needed according to IMF. IMF says that just devalue the currency, it will help. Why? So who will it help? The question is, it's a multinational. It can, when the rupee is cheap, you can buy Pakistan much more cheaply. Privatize. Well, you see, if a big multinational comes in, it cannot easily compete with government. The government has a lot of resources. It can easily destroy all local industry, and they do. We have our ice cream factories, and we had our local telephones, and we had many industries that have been completely destroyed by foreign competition. Because the foreigners are very big and very powerful, and they use very nasty tactics. They run their prices very low, which are below their cost. Nobody else who has a small pocket can compete, but they can afford large amounts of losses. And when all of the competition is destroyed, then they go back to their standard methods. So that's why you want liberalization. Let everybody do whatever they want. Don't interfere. Deregulate. Don't have any laws to control. And then, according to the theory, this will bring about a miracle. But actually, these theories, these policies were tried out in different places, and in all places they have been tried, they have led to disaster. And in fact, in 2003, World Bank published a book in which basically they admitted that for 10 years we have tried these Washington Consensus policies all over the world, and they have not brought any success. In fact, the person who invented the name, the policy, Williamson, yes, he has admitted that this experience has not been successful. But then they have come up with a new Washington Consensus. Now this is 20 policies, and he has explained why this didn't work. Basically, it's a problem of sequencing, and governments are corrupt and things, and the X, Y, and Z. Many excuses why it didn't work. But issues are not where they are analyzing them. Basically, the key has been lost in a different place, and they are searching for it in a different place. So now I'm going to try to wrap this up by saying that there are three megatrends, three big underlying issues that are driving the world today, economics, and in order to resist them, we have to understand what these trends are, and then we have to take intelligent action against them. One of these is the trend of financialization. Today, You see, if you want to make money, and this is, most of you are not in the class, basically this is for the top 1 in 1,000. Even 1% doesn't come in to the game. The game is being played by perhaps the top 0.001%. So for these people, if they want to make money, there are two ways. Either you can build factories and buy farms and improve productive capacity and buy ships and go and catch fish. This is the real sector. But the other way is to invest in the stock market or to buy land. And now if a lot of money is chasing land, the land prices will increase. And a lot of money is put into stocks, the stock prices will increase. Suppose we all start buying stocks. Stock prices double. Our wealth we have suddenly become rich. But did anything happen which will increase the productive capacity of the economy? No. So, we can make the largest amount of money by doing things which are completely useless. And that is the case today. So, there is no relationship between the amount of money you can earn and the service, the value that you are providing to the economy. And this divergence has started since deregulation of the financial industry, which started in the 80s. In 1999, the Glass-Steagall Act, which prevented the gambling in the banks, was repealed. And in 2007, you had the global financial crisis. Not too long. Banks started gambling like mad, and they collapsed. So, the thing is that even post-crisis, nothing has changed. There was a lot of attempts made in the USA to create regulations, to bring back the Glass-Steagall Act. But this time, they did not succeed because basically the wealthy people have bought out the Congress and they have bought out the regulation. This is called regulatory capture. You see, the industry has billions of dollars. What is the regulation? We have our NEPRA, the Pakistan Regulatory Agency. They have a few bureaucrats, 10 people sitting there earning minor amounts of money. The industry that they are trying to regulate is a huge elephant, a monster. It has billions of dollars. It can buy every one of them. So how are these 10 people going to regulate this monster? Either they have to be really giants of moral character like Umar Farooq Radiallahu Ta'ala. If he was sitting there, he could do it because he would not be for sale. But every ordinary person, you cannot do it. That's what happened in the USA. Forget about Pakistan. So, as a result, post-crisis, there has been no regulation and it is continuing. The financialization, the people who have money can make money, more money, without doing anything productive, and they have so much money they can buy out the rest of the world. And they are doing that. They are buying up money. There is what's called a shopping spree. People are buying up factories and and businesses and steel mills and everywhere. And what they do is that they capture the revenue. So the laborer gets very less. The people who are actually running the business, they get very little, and all of the profits goes to the capitalist. So it's like a giant leech which is sucking the blood from the economy. And this is continuing process. People recognize it, and many people have complained about it, but the power is all in the hands of the rich, and nothing has been done. And big financial analysts said that the next crisis will happen because nothing has been done to prevent it. And then maybe some people will listen to what I have to say, because he's saying that we should have regulations, we should have rules, we should prevent this from happening. But he's saying nobody is going to listen to me now, only when the next crisis hits. Now the one very interesting thing is that crises hurt everybody, but they don't hurt these super rich. When the global financial crisis occurred, then trillions of dollars was paid to the bankers. The bankers who had caused a banker collapse, they went home with huge bonuses in their pockets. They were not hurt at all by this crisis. So they are quite happy. They don't want to prevent the next crisis. It doesn't cause them any harm. It causes the whole of 99% of the population harmed. They don't care about that. Now, so financialization is one big thing that you need to understand what's going on in the world. The second thing is neocolonialism. In the olden times, the Europe invaded in 1890s, in 1900. 90% of the globe was owned by Europe. And basically what they did, something which nobody understands very well, is they basically converted the whole world into their factories. They destroyed, every culture, every society, every nation had its own economy. They were running their thing. They destroyed the economies and they used them. Okay, India, the purpose was to supply raw materials to England and to buy finished products from England. So our own economy is built around entirely different basis. So these economies were destroyed and replaced by the economy which is basically a dependent economy. The economy is used as a unit to serve England and the colonizers. So today we are living in the same world. Basically what happens today, unlike colonialism where they had governors and they had foreign troops, what they do is they give massive loans to Pakistan. What are these loans? You have to think of them as salaries to the government. Our leaders, our MNAs, our politicians, they are all receiving salaries in the form of loans, and they pay back by extracting taxes from the population and paying the interest. So basically, they have purchased our governments all over the world, all over the planet. And the government is acting as a tax collector for the foreign agents. Look at this slide, you will understand. The rich countries are giving foreign aid of about $136 billion to the poor countries. At the same time, every year the poor countries pay $600 billion in interest on debt, the principal amount of which has been paid many times, long time ago. But the interest payments continue. In addition to that, there is capital flight of $1 trillion. Meaning, what is capital flight? Well, one part is that the corrupt leaders are putting their money into Swiss accounts, but the other part is that multinationals are making profits and repatriating this to their own countries or wherever they want. So now, if you think that, you see, you're living in a country where you're losing many $1 billion every year as payments to the outsiders, and you think that we are going to work the same fiscal policy here and the same fiscal policy on the other side, you just don't know much about the real world. That it's not the way it works. So when you're living in on the right hand side, where the bottom 3 billion people have about the same amount of assets as the top 85 people, then economics will not be the same in that country as it will be in the other country. And that's very important to understand. So those are two megatrends, and I will tell you about the third megatrend, and we'll stop here. I've gone over time limit a little bit. The third megatrend is basically the battle of ideas, which has been going on since time immemorial. And basically it's the way it is going on right now is the free markets versus the regulated markets. The 2007, in 1929, the free markets took a big hit and they were wiped out. And for about 50 years, the regulated markets theory, which is the Keynesian theory, dominated the world. After that, the 1980s came along and the free markets succeeded. But this time, in 2007, a big crisis took place. A lot of Nobel Prize winners have said that our models are wrong and we need to change the theories. But nothing has really happened. This is important to understand that actually those people, the wealthy people, studied history. And they said that last time in 1929 we lost, but this time we will not. So now they have, even post-crisis, where everybody understands what's going on, real change has not taken place because they have captured the media, they have captured the parliaments, they have captured the rule makers. So even though there is a huge amount of understanding that something has gone wrong and something needs to be changed, but no action is taking place. Lots of action was tried and it was blocked or defeated or changed. For example, the Dodd-Frank bill in the US Congress. This was supposed to be a replacement for the Glass-Steagall Act. Again, the idea was to prevent banks from gambling. The Glass-Steagall Act was a small act of 30 pages, easy to understand. The Dodd-Frank Act has 600 pages full of complicated loopholes. Anyone can find a way through, and basically people have said that this will not have any effect on regulation because everybody can find, basically you need a smart lawyer and you will find out a clause in this 600 pages which will allow you to gamble and nobody can stop it. So even though the attempt was made to prevent banks from gambling, just like which led to the 2000, it was not successful. The act was changed because those people who were powerful, they had bought their congressmen, and you can find this documented. In fact, in the USA, there was a law that prevented corporations from giving too much money to congressmen on their campaigns because it was clear that this is like a bribe. This law was repealed. Now the corporation can give millions of dollars to their congressman and get him elected, and then obviously they will expect favors in the return. So bribery is now officially legal in the USA. So in that situation, obviously the multinational corporations with huge amounts of money, they can buy the government completely legally without any law against it. Okay, so I'll stop here. So there is this battle of ideas, the free markets versus the regulation, and this is the third megatrend. Currently, although the conditions were right for the regulation side to win again, this has happened many times in history, but in fact it has been blocked. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
So if there are any questions, you may ask, but please try to be very brief and ask directly the specific question which you may ask. Please also introduce yourself.
So my name is I wanted to say that it is important. It's trying to bring the Glass-Steagall